Hi there! In this video we will learn all the rules of chess. Chess is among us for more than 1000 years and it's a great game. It's a mix of art, science and sports, and it can also bring you great benefits into your real life. So if you have 10 minutes or so, you can learn this magnificent game. So why not just get started? Here we see the initial position. We have always 8 pawns to each side, in front of 2 rooks, in the corners 2 knights, 2 bishops, a queen and a king. The white king is always on a dark square, and in front the other king, the black king, on a light square. Now let's talk about the stage of all the action, the board. So we have 8 squares per 8, gives a total of 64 squares. And we see here on the edge of the board some letters and numbers. The letters are the columns, so we have column A, column B until column H, and the numbers are the rows. So we have row 1, row 2 until row 8. And what is this for? This is to annotate games, to indicate moves. So for example, if a knight gets into this square, we see that this square is E4, and we say knight E4. That goes for all the pieces, bishop e4, rook e4, and if it's a pawn, we just say e4. We don't say pawn e4, we just say the name of the square. Another important detail of the board is that the lower left square is always a dark one. So if you see in a movie or a series or in real life a light square here, they're playing with the board incorrectly. And so now you won't do the same mistake. So now let's talk about the movements of the pieces. So we have the rook moves horizontally and vertically, the number of squares that it wants. Then we have the knight moves in an L shape. So if a knight is on this square, it can go and do all these L's that I'm pointing. And the knight is the only piece in chess that can jump over any other piece. So for example here, the knight can go all the squares since they're empty, and for example this knight can also jump over the other pieces. So it's the only piece that can jump over others. Next we have the bishop. The bishop moves diagonally, the number of squares that it wants. Now we have the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece in chess because it's a rook, makes horizontals, makes verticals, and it's a bishop, makes diagonals. It's the most powerful piece in chess. And now let's talk about the most valuable piece in chess, because the game ends if you get checkmated over your king or give checkmate to your opponent's king. What are the movements of the king? The same as the queen, but only one square in every direction. And the kings can never approach each other, so they have to be one square apart from each other. So in this case, these 3 squares are restricted to any king. So let's talk now about the pawn. The pawn moves only vertically, so it goes one square at a time, but in the first move it can go 2 squares, or only one, and then just one at a time, and if it reaches the 8th, we promote the pawn into a piece that we want. So usually we select the queen. But the pawn, although it moves vertically, it captures on the diagonal, 1 square. So for example, let's see this position. The pawn goes, let me put another pawn. The pawn goes 2 squares, now this pawn goes 2 squares, and the pawns now are blocked because they only move vertically. So if white now plays this pawn, now black can capture this pawn 1 square diagonally. Now that we've seen the movement of the pieces, let's see their value. So we see there 1 point for the pawn, the minor pieces that are the knight and the bishop 3 points, and then we have the major pieces, the rook 5 points and the queen 9 points. And the king cannot be captured, so it doesn't have a material value. So now that we know this, I'm going to play a position, because now we are going to talk about the objective of the game. That is to give checkmate to our opponent. But what is checkmate? What is a check? Let's check it out. I'm going to play this position, so now we know how to move the pieces. So let's suppose that this position happens. And now black captures this pawn, and white goes bishop b5 check. Why is it a check? Because the bishop is attacking the king diagonally. And the check is a direct threat, and it has to be defended immediately. If the check cannot be defended, then we have the checkmate. So I've played this position for us to see that in this case there are three ways to defend this check. So the first one is to capture the piece that is giving check. So in this case, knight captures bishop and there's no more check. The second way is to block the check, so to put a piece in the diagonal. We have several options here. We can play this pawn here, the knight. This knight can also block the check, the bishop, and even queen here. Of course, we wouldn't trade our precious queen for a bishop. And the last way is just to run away from the check. So the king moves and gets away from the check. What about checkmate? Let's see here an example or two. Let's see the fastest checkmate in chess. f3, e5, g4, and queen h4, it's checkmate. Why? Because no piece can capture the queen, no piece can block the diagonal, so we see the knight makes L's, so we cannot block, the bishop can't also block, and the king cannot play here because it will still be in check. So this move doesn't happen. It will be illegal. The king is never captured. So here the game is finished. It's checkmate. Let's go home or start another game. Another checkmate that you can learn is the scholar's mate. So white plays here attacking this pawn. Now black defends. Bishop comes here and we see two pieces striking a point. So black now goes here. We cannot capture because the knight would capture our queen. So the queen retreats, and now if black makes a random move, queen takes f7, and this is checkmate because the queen is giving check. The king cannot capture the queen because it's defended, and the king cannot escape because the queen covers this horizontal. So now that we've seen checks and checkmate, let's see two special movements in chess. So let's suppose this position, and we've seen, for example, now if white plays here, black can simply capture this pawn because the pawns capture one square diagonally. But if white plays here, strange enough, black can also capture this pawn because of the rule of en passant that says that one pawn goes two squares in his first move and stays beside the opponent's pawn can capture our pawn, like this. So just as if this pawn has moved only one square. If it moves two on his first move and stays beside the opponent's pawn can capture. But it has to be right away. So for example, white played here, now black can capture. If black makes another move, now it cannot capture. It has to be in the moment that the movement happens. So now, for example, if black plays here, in the same way, the pawn went two squares, stays beside this pawn, and now we can capture en passant. Now let's talk about the other movement, that is castling. So castling is a move between the king and the rook, but you always have to touch the king first. So it's a king movement, but it happens between the king and the rook. We have short and long castling. In either cases, the king jumps two squares and the rook comes beside, so short castling. And long castling. So There are rules so that this can happen. So the first one is that we cannot have pieces between the rook and the king. The other is that neither of these pieces can move so that we can castle. So for example, if we move this rook, there's no longer short castle, and if we move the king and then came back, it doesn't matter, we don't have any kind of castle. And there are other rules so that we cannot castle. If the king is in check, if the king when castling goes through check, and if the king after castling is in check. Let's see those three examples. So for example here, the black plays knight here, giving the check. In this moment the white king cannot castle. If the knight is here, the white king can castle here, but it cannot castle long because it would pass through check, through an attacked square, so it's not possible. The same would be if there was a bishop here. The bishop covers this square, so castling long is not possible. And at last, if the knight is here, we could castle short, of course, but we could not castle long because after this the king would be in check, so with legal move it's not possible. So after this we have almost all the rules seen, but we have to talk about the draw rules. Let's check them out. So here we see material insufficiency. What is this? If in a game we end the game with only two kings, this is material insufficiency. There's no pieces to throw the checkmate, so it's a draw. If we have a minor piece like a knight or a bishop, it's material insufficiency too. You can give checkmate with just a minor piece. But if there is a pawn, this is not material insufficiency because the pawn can promote into a rook or a queen and give checkmate. Then we have perpetual check. What is this? Let's see an example of this. I'm going to put this position. So here, white is losing, black has 3 extra pawns, and it threatens checkmate in one move. But it's white to play, and white goes for the perpetual check. How? Well, just giving check, check, check. Notice that the queen in front of the king cannot come up because the queen covers the squares, and so white are just going to draw the game by perpetual check. Next we have threefold repetition. We can illustrate this with the same example. For example, let's suppose this position. White plays here check, now check, now check. So this position has repeated twice, and then check and check, and we have seen this position for 3 times. Threefold repetition, draw. Then we have draw by agreement, so a player asks for draw to his opponent, his opponent accepts, so we have the draw. The 50 move rule is when a king is alone, so it has no more pieces. From that moment on, the opponent has 50 moves to give checkmate. If he can't, it's a draw. And then we have stalemate. I'm going to show this also. Let's suppose this position, and white is moving, so white moves here, and this is stalemate. It's a draw. Why? Because black cannot move any piece. This pawn is blocked, cannot move, and the king cannot move. The king cannot go to a legal square because the queen is attacking all these squares. So the black king is not in check and doesn't have a legal move, so it's a stalemate, it's a draw. And so after this we've seen all the rules of chess. They're pretty easy, I guess. You just have sometimes to be a little more experienced to realize all these rules, but they're easy. And if you want to start to play immediately, I'm going to give you the 3 best chess sites of the world. So here they are. I recommend you to try all of them. Chess.org, for example, is a light site. It's a user-friendly site. Chess.com is a great site also. It has a great graphical interface. Chess24, it's also great. They are all very good. So if you want to do your first games, go ahead. I'm going to leave these links on the description. And don't be afraid, you will play with players that are in the same level as you, okay? Because there is a rating system or ranking system that will balance the pairings. So go ahead, do your first moves. I hope you have liked this video. If so, please don't forget to hit that like button. And of course, subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be making more beginner videos so you can grow in chess. So I'll see you later. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.